Howdy, my name is Vanessa Courier-Olson. I am the Forage Extension Specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and this is...
I'm Monty Roquette. I'm a Texas A&M Regents Fellow, AgriLife Professor. At the center, I do forage, soil, plant, animal grazing research here at the center.
And you are here at the Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension Center in Overton, Texas, which is in East Texas. And today we are here for a field day. So we are going to be visiting with you about grazing management practices and talking more about forage production systems in Central and East Texas.
They need to take a look. Look at what's going on. A, do I have water? That'd be one of the first things. Are the cattle in the pasture? What kind of pasture do we have? This is electric fencing. Electric fencing is great because we don't need so much of it. But what do we see when you look at something? We're trying to look at the body condition score of the cattle. That will tell us what we did wrong. Are they fat or thin because of what we wanted to do? Is that our treatment? Or for a cattleman, did he run out of grass? Or does he have internal parasites? Kind of the two main things there. What went wrong? Well, did I do this because I wanted to? Do my cows have teeth? I mean, there's a lot of little checkpoint things in there. If it's young cattle, then they've got teeth. They have been dewormed. We got them ready. What's limiting them? The nutritive value of this forage. What is this forage based on? Nutritive value of the soil. How much fertilizer did I put on? How much rainfall did I get? That controls the amount of forage mass that we get. That then controls the opportunity to put stocking. Do I need one calf, two calves? What do I need? In general, these Tipton 85 Bermuda grass pastures will accommodate 2,000 pounds of beef per acre. How much is that? Well, that's 400 or 500 pound calves, or that's 600 pound calves per acre for the year. And that is a general rule, and that has little wavelengths in it depending, okay? So it's always best, I'll say that 3 times because it's always best to be at a lower stocking rate so that now you don't have to sell, or you don't have to go buy hay or supplement. It's always better to have a pasture that is lower in its stocking so that more forage grows, and now you can make pasture smaller. That electric fence, you can make this pasture smaller and cut hay and then graze over there. So we could have done things differently here if we were managing for a different thing, but we have a fixed stocking rate, okay?
Selecting a stocking rate, like Monty said, is going to be based on the forage that you're grazing, the fertilizing, how much fertilizer is put out, rainfall. Those factors that are going to influence forage production, because how much forage you produce will impact your carrying capacity. So your carrying capacity is going to be based on how much forage are you growing and producing that can actually support the nutrition of those animals. And so the stage of production, their nutrient needs will also influence that. And so stocking rate has to be flexible. So it's going to be based on forage species, variety. You know, Monty mentioned Tipton 85 being the highest in nutritive value and potentially the most productive of our Bermuda grass varieties. But if someone's growing, say, common Bermuda grass, it's not going to be as productive. Nutritive value is going to be different. If they're using other forage species such as native grasses, that's a whole different ball game as far as carrying capacity or stocking rate, or how we might manage that forage with grazing. So producers need to understand there's a lot of variables that influence that. So it's not a one prescription that applies to every producer across the state. So there's always interest in different grazing management strategies. So we see a lot of things about rotational grazing, other management strategies, especially in popular press. It's really pushed quite a bit, and personally, I fear, based on my experience as an extension specialist, as that a lot of producers see that as potentially a band-aid or something to fix other issues that they have within their forage system and their livestock system. So rotational grazing can be an effective tool if it's used appropriately. And that rotational grazing gets very tricky because you're talking about moving animals from one pasture to another. And most people make those decisions based on forage production. So they would allow their livestock, say in this pasture, to basically graze that forage almost down to soil level or to the dirt. Really put a lot of pressure potentially, graze a lot of that forage until they feel like it's fully utilized before they would move their animals. But in using a grazing strategy like rotational grazing, you have to look at forage production. You also have to pay attention to body condition score of your animals, and you have to think about our forages. Majority of the nutritive value is in the leaf material, and the leaves are on the upper part of that plant. So if you initiate grazing to begin that growth cycle, livestock are consuming a lot of leaves. They're getting a lot of nutritive value, but as you continue to graze that plant, they're going to start consuming more stem, which is lower in nutritive value. So you have the potential for animals to start losing body weight if you're not moving them or giving them an opportunity to continue to graze leaves. The other concern is when you start rotating to another pasture, if you've had good fertility, soil fertility, good rainfall, that forage, as it grows and increases in maturity, the nutritive value is going to decline. So if you wait until that forage is knee-high before you initiate grazing, you're running the risk of potentially grazing a lower quality forage. Even though they're consuming leaves, as that plant matures through the season, it's going to decrease in nutritive value. So it can be very tricky in regards to using something like rotational grazing. It should be used to capture the highest nutritive value of that plant in those different fields. So just putting up cross fencing doesn't necessarily fix someone's grazing management issues. A big challenge for producers in Central and East Texas is overgrazing, and not keeping in mind that forage production is based on fertility, so fertilizing, soil testing, and applying fertilizer appropriately based on those soil tests, and then rainfall. A lot of producers are overstocked, meaning that they have too much grazing pressure, so there's a greater need. There's more animals that have more need for forage. You're not producing adequate forage to meet their needs. And in overgrazing can be very damaging to a forage stand. You're not allowing that plant time to rest and to recover from that grazing event and to pull nutrients from the root structure to produce new leaves. Anytime that plant produces new leaves that's very high in nutritive value, they're often selected by the animals. And so we end up losing root structure as well as what we see above the soil surface. And those plants are going to become less competitive against things like weeds, undesirable broadleaf weeds, or other undesirable grasses within that forage system. And it also runs the risk, if we're overgrazing, we're potentially exposing more soil. We have an opportunity or risk of having soil erosion that can lead to runoff of nutrients or soil into bodies of water that might be in proximity of a particular field or an area.
About the mindset of a grazer is that they want good forage utilization, and that's what Dr. Corrier said. They want to use this pasture and then move on. And when you do that method, you have just shot yourself in both feet, because now the cattle graze the top third, they graze that, but you're not happy with that. I want them to graze the rest, so you keep them on there, keep them on there, keep them on there, and when you move them, they gain weight for the first day or two or three, and then the last 3 days, they've lost weight. So when you get into that mindset of high percent utilization prior to moving, then that's when you have an opportunity to make no animal gains in what you've done if you've just practiced. You practice moving cattle. That's not the purpose. We want to have good forage growth and take advantage of that for cattle. So we, other people, and I've been one of them, have used more than one set of cattle to graze. So let's say this is our pasture. We've grazed all we want with those stock cattle. We're going to move them to another one. What will we put in here to graze this relatively lower quality total? I mean, it has pretty good quality if you're picking, but totally from a standpoint, we would put dry cows. Dry cows would consume it, but that means, I have to have two sets of cattle. I had to have my leaders and my followers, and sometimes that gets a little too much for people to want to do that, but that becomes one of the practice of adaptive, flexible, and first word out of Dr. Corder's mouth was flexible grazing, and that's one of them with a rotation scheme, is a flexible management because it's not based on time, it's not based on hours, it's based on forage growth. When do I need to move them? And you can, after a while, you can say, hey, I need to move them, because if you don't, guess what? They'll move themselves.
Overgrazing it's going to be even riskier during drought conditions. Our warm season perennials, our introduced warm season perennials that are sod forming, like Monty was talking about earlier, are fairly drought tolerant. That is based on their soil fertility as to how drought tolerant they might be. But if we are overgrazing those fields as well, those plants are not going to regrow or respond as quickly following a drought. So we always recommend, if we are in a drought or there is potential for drought to come up, like very often in Texas, is that one recommendation is to reduce our stocking rate. Take some of that grazing pressure off of that field so more of those plants have time to rest, to not only regrow top material, leaf material, but also to build a strong root structure that can take advantage of deeper soil moisture. So if we looked at the drought of 2011, a lot of producers overgrazed their fields trying to hold on to cattle for a longer period of time as opposed to selling. And those fields were extremely overgrazed, and a lot of those fields were lost because of that continued grazing pressure during that already stressed drought event. And we also saw a lot of weeds pop up. Weeds typically are going to be much more drought tolerant than our forages. And they will also tolerate lower soil fertility or a low soil pH. So they really thrive in some of those stressful situations that our forages do not necessarily survive in or thrive in. And so we ended up a lot of overgrazed fields that take a very long time to recover once you do have rain. You need forage and root structures to help capture any rainfall that you might actually get. So if you have a field that's overgrazed, you're going to have a lot more runoff oftentimes, as opposed to actual moisture capture or water capture or retention of that moisture that you've received.
We did evaluate the response to drought, and we compared Tifton, coastal, and a turf type Tifton. Tifton 85 is the most drought tolerant of any of those. And you say, well, why is that? Well, it is one of two things. It either has a deeper, more expansive rooting rhizome system, or, and we didn't prove this, or it utilizes the uptake of moisture, it utilizes that more efficiently than does another plant. But Tifton 85, and that's why it has become so widely popular, is because it's highly productive, not highly productive, it's more productive in times of drought than is some of the other Bermuda grasses and Bahia grass. Now, we mentioned Bahia grass. A lot of people have Bahia grass because it can either be planted on purpose or it comes in as an invader. And we have treatments of pastures where it does come in as an invader. When the nitrogen level in the soil gets low, that allows for lots of other things to come in. Drought and low and reduced nitrogen allows for other species to invade. Like where they've grazed and they've stepped on this, there's major opportunities for erosion if there's no sod. Sod grasses have the best erosion control as compared to any bunch grass. Bunch grasses are like this, and there's soil in between. They look like they're full, but they're not. They're not covering the ground like the sod grasses. So sod grasses are better adapted to the more humid areas. Doesn't mean we don't have some in arid conditions, but they're better adapted to the humid conditions that would be from I-35 to Georgia. So we don't have many native grasses in the east. If someone has a native grass, they will have it for aesthetics. They want to see it. They want to have it on their property. It can attract wildlife, can attract the seed, will attract quail. It provides some kind of cover maybe for deer. Deer are not grazing on switchgrass. They're hiding in it or something. So it becomes a cover, and that's good. But when we say, well, let's graze it, the bunch grasses are mandated for rotational stocking. If you continuously stock in a continuous grazing scheme, at any stocking rate, bunch grasses, like the native grasses, will not tolerate continuous stocking. They need rotational stocking, so you graze them to a level of stubble, and that stubble is going to be somewhere, let's just pick a number, this could be about 6 inches or so. You say, well, that's not right, it's 4.5. About 6 inches or so, graze that off, move, allow regrowth, like Dr. Corey said, allow that regrowth. Cattle will come back in there in some time. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 4 weeks, it could be 6 weeks. Whenever they has made enough growth, they'll come in here and select those leaves again, and then move off of that bunch grass stubble, so it can make regrowth and be persistent and maintain its growth. Otherwise, you will graze it to a point where the grazing is severe enough that you don't have enough leaf for regrowth, and now it's disappeared from the system.
Hopefully they are out in their pastures, in their hay meadows, looking, paying attention, and not just driving by 80 miles an hour in the truck. And they're actually out looking at potential forage production, how much forage is out there, what is out there. Is the desired forage the dominant species? Are there other species that they find for their system undesirable? Whether that's Bahia grass in a Bermuda grass hay meadow, that's often undesirable within a hay production system, or is there a density of broadleaf weeds that are decreasing the grazable area that livestock are not consuming, and that is competing against that desirable forage? They should also, if it is a pasture system, they should pay attention to their animals, to their body condition score, to the health and well-being of those animals. Are they actively grazing? What are they grazing potentially? And typically, as producers call me a lot of times with concerns or issues within their forage system, whether it's a pasture or hay meadow, one of my first recommendations, probably more often than not, or question is, have you done a soil test recently? So soil testing is very important for any of our forage production systems. So a lot of times, one of my first recommendations is to collect that information, is to collect soil samples, have that soil analyzed to determine what is the soil pH, what is the level of our primary nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then what are some of the concerns within that forage system, and is that fertility or lack of fertility potentially influencing or impacting that forage production system. So for example, this morning I actually had a phone call. A producer called, and his Bermuda grass is not performing or not producing as well as desired. He has what he referred to as some dead spots, or spots that are thinning within his forage system. And my first question was, when was the last time you did a soil test? Well, last year. Okay, well, we need to start there. We need to start with a soil test, see what our nutrient status is. There may not be a deficiency, but I'm willing to bet, based on my experience in East Texas, our sandy soils are naturally deficient in nutrients, and they are also going to be acidic, having a lower soil pH than some of our heavier clay or blackland clay soils. So it's more it's more often than not within East Texas, within our sandy soils, that we can have some fertility issues. And so I'm willing to bet in his particular situation that is his primary issue, is lack of soil nutrients. So there's nothing to support that persistence of that forage, and definitely not enough nutrients to support production. So that's something that's really important with a perennial forage system, which, as Monty mentioned earlier, is the foundation of our livestock systems in East Texas, Central Texas, and throughout the southeast of the United States, is those warm season perennials. And once they are established, we want them to persist, whether that's for our lifetime, our children, our grandchildren's lifetime. And so fertility is important not only for production, the amount of forage we produce and the nutritive value of that forage, it's also important for persistence and longevity of a stand. And so soil testing is very important as far as forage production, paying attention to doing a visual appraisal of what's the density of your desired forage versus undesired species, whether it's grasses or broadleaf weeds, paying attention to your livestock, to their body condition score, to their health and well-being, and making sure that you're providing adequate forage for them based on their production system.
One of the visuals that this is continuous stocking at a low stocking rate. How do we know that? Well, I know that because of when you take a look at it, you do not see any refusal areas. When cattle are in a grazing situation, they will consume, they defecate, they will avoid those defecation spots, and that will become a regrowth and they graze in between. When you visually take a visual appraisal and you say, oh, I see now that there's some refusal areas, but the grass in between is fairly low height. That is a first notification. You need to move those cattle, or you need to find another stocking rate, or you're going to overgraze, if that's a good term. You're going to graze those pastures to the point of potential losing some of that forage, and animal performance is going to continue to go down because there's not enough forage mass for their growth. So a visual is are there any refusals? There's none here, so that means we're either overstocked or understocked, or we're understocked. If you see no refusal, no defecation, previously ungrazed spots, then maybe you're overgrazed. If it's down to about an inch or two. But now when you look and drive by, you can drive by at 50 miles an hour and look at somebody's pastures. You see refusals. Oh, he is approaching some economic optimum stocking rate because he's used the forage, but he hasn't if that's a good term, hasn't overutilized those pastures. So that's just one little caveat of taking a look. That's the first clue. Then you can go measure. You talked about measuring. We don't use a measuring stick, although when you walk out in there, is it over your ankles or not. And so forage height is related to forage mass, always is. So that's one of the, how tall is the forage? She talked about forage being this tall. Well, it's a lot of forage mass. They're going to graze the top third of that, and they're going to say, what else do we have? Because I've grazed that. So that is a visual observation. Moisture, when we get a heavy rainfall and it runs down this hill, some of it gets to the end, but most of it's going to be caught in this sod, and it's going to infiltrate into this sandy soil. It's not going to run off because we're not overgrazed. If a producer, once he says, I'm going to be in the cow business, you need to learn how to body condition score a calf. Because the body condition score, we have a 1 to 9 system. We've had it for many, many years. 1 is they're very emaciated and can barely get around, and a 9 is they're obese. Where are they? What's the level in there? Well, we think when cows are about to calve, we'd like for them to be a body condition score 5. They could maybe, but why is that? Because so they can recalve. They can come into estrus, rebreed, and have another calf. If their body condition score is 4 when they calve, I'm just giving you some generalities. Some cows can calve repeatedly at a condition score of 4. The bulk of the cattle requires perhaps a little higher body condition score. We'll just pick 5. Some cows may require 6, but 5 is a good number, I think. You've got some experience there, but that is a good visual of what's, if you don't know how to score cattle, then you need to just go to a seminar or find out how to body condition score, and then we can body condition score these pastures. And that's what we were talking about, is did they have visual refusals or not? So you undergrazed or overgrazed.
One of my first recommendations is soil testing, making sure that we are following soil test recommendations, and that not only to make sure we are applying what we need or what that forage needs, but also to make sure we're not over applying nutrients, because without that soil test, we're running the risk of not applying enough for optimum forage production and persistence, but we're also running the risk of over applying nutrients. And when we over apply those nutrients, and if we do not have good vegetative cover, that's when we're running a great risk of soil erosion, as well as erosion or movement of those nutrients into our bodies of water that can be damaging to aquatic life. So that's a very important best management practice in regards to protecting our soil as well as our water resources. The best way to protect our soil resource is to maintain vegetative cover, whether that is with Bermuda grass, native grasses, pine trees in East Texas, but maintaining vegetative cover to hold the soil in place, to reduce soil erosion. I often get questions from producers on, recommendations on what to plant on a dam for a pond or around bodies of water that might have some different elevation or slopes in soils to try to reduce some of that soil erosion. So there are tools, there are plants, whether it's a broadleaf plant or a grass, that can be established to try to reduce some of that soil erosion and to maintain good ground cover or good vegetative cover. Something else we have to keep in mind, especially in East Texas, where we do end up with a lot of ponds and creeks within our pasture systems and a part of our landscape. And with livestock, a lot of producers will use those sources for their water source for livestock. I think that really has to be evaluated, as far as, unfortunately, livestock can cause damage to those bodies of water, especially at an entry point where they're moving in and out of that source of water. And that can lead to a lot of soil erosion and kind of shifting of that landscape. So there are producers that have installed, added protection layers, whether it's fencing or they've really limited livestock access. They're still using that water for their livestock, but they've tried to reduce the negative impact those livestock might have on that body of water and the landscape around it. So there's some great publications. Lone Star Healthy Streams is a great program, as well as provide some publications on some recommendations as to how we can manage or best manage those water resources and still allow livestock to have access to them. Obviously, another option is to bring in water, to have water through water lines, through a trough system. That's a way to reduce potentially that negative impact. But being mindful of those natural resources is part of our job as livestock and forage producers in Texas.